Go ahead, the deputy said with a crooked smile as he reached across the counter. Show me what you think is so important. The words echoed through the small sheriff's station just before the sharp sound of tearing paper cut through the quiet morning like a blade through glass. Every conversation stopped. The receptionist looked up. A patrol officer halfway through his coffee froze with the cup still inches from his lips. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to hum more loudly as scraps of heavy government paper drifted slowly onto the polished floor. Naomi Brooks never flinched. At 34, she stood calmly on the public side of the front desk wearing a charcoal gray blazer over a simple navy blouse, her leather messenger bag resting against one hip. She looked nothing like the image Deputy Ryan Mercer had already decided belonged inside his head. No flashing credentials hung around her neck. No entourage followed behind her. No raised voice announced her arrival. She had walked into the station less than 3 minutes earlier, greeted everyone politely, and asked to speak with the commanding lieutenant regarding a sealed legal packet that required immediate acknowledgement. Instead, she found Ryan Mercer, tall, broad-shouldered, and convinced that the silver badge pinned to his chest gave him authority over every person who crossed his path. Mercer leaned comfortably against the counter as though the building belonged exclusively to him. Years of small-town familiarity had sharpened his confidence into something that bordered on arrogance. The deputies around him exchanged amused glances because they had seen this performance before. Mercer enjoyed making people nervous. He enjoyed deciding who mattered before hearing a single word they had to say. Naomi had noticed at the moment he looked at her instead of listening to her. "Sir," she had said evenly, sliding the large manila packet onto the counter with both hands. "This envelope is sealed for legal reasons. Please deliver it unopened to Lieutenant Harris." Mercer barely glanced at the printed label across the front. Bright red letters read "Authorized Personnel Only," followed by multiple agency markings and a thick evidence seal running across the flap. Instead of reading them carefully, he laughed under his breath. "That sounds important," he said. "Maybe I should make sure there isn't anything dangerous inside." Naomi's expression remained composed. "Please don't open it." Her voice carried no anger, only certainty. It must remain sealed. The station had grown quieter with every sentence. Somewhere in the hallway behind the booking area, a printer buzzed to life before falling silent again. Outside, sunlight reflected off patrol cruisers lined neatly across the parking lot, while the American flag near the entrance moved gently in the warm North Carolina breeze. Everything felt strangely ordinary except for the stillness gathering inside the lobby. Mercer picked up the packet, weighing it casually in one hand before tapping it against the counter. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "people come in here all the time pretending they've got official business." A couple of deputies chuckled politely. Naomi never reacted. "I'm asking you one last time," she said. "Please leave the seal intact." Mercer smirked. "Or what?" For the first time, Naomi looked directly into his eyes. There was no fear there, no frustration, only a calm that somehow unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. "Because once that seal is broken," she answered quietly, "this stops being your choice." Mercer rolled his eyes. "Nice speech." With one quick motion, he tore straight through the government seal. The ripping sound echoed across the station as classified documents slipped from the envelope and scattered across the floor. Several deputies instinctively bent down before stopping themselves, uncertain whether they should touch the pages. Mercer looked satisfied, brushing tiny pieces of torn paper from his uniform sleeve as if he had just proven a point. Naomi watched every page settle before slowly lifting her wrist to glance at the time. Then she lowered her hand, folded it gently over the strap of her bag, and spoke so softly that everyone in the lobby leaned forward to hear. "They should be here in about 8 minutes." No one laughed this time. Deputy Ryan Mercer glanced toward the lobby windows as though expecting someone to appear immediately, but the parking lot remained almost empty except for a county patrol vehicle easing into its usual space beneath the fluttering American flag. He gave a dismissive shrug, kicked one of the loose pages with the toe of his boot, and folded his arms across his chest. "You are trying to intimidate the wrong station," he said. "If somebody is coming, they can check in at the front desk like everybody else." Naomi Brooks lowered her eyes for only a moment, carefully memorizing where every document had landed across the polished tile. None of them had been touched. That mattered. She knew exactly what the security cameras above the reception area had captured during the last several minutes. Every movement, every word, every decision had unfolded beneath multiple recording angles. She quietly reached into her messenger bag, removed a small leather notebook, and wrote the current time with calm, deliberate handwriting. The simple act unsettled the dispatcher sitting several feet away. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said cautiously, "would you like me to call Lieutenant Harris?" Naomi looked up with the same composed expression she had carried since walking through the front door. "Yes, please. Tell him Naomi Brooks is waiting exactly where Deputy Mercer instructed her to remain." The dispatcher hesitated before reaching for the telephone. Mercer scoffed loudly. "You still have not answered my question. Who exactly are you?" Naomi closed the notebook without rushing. "The person assigned to deliver that packet. That is not an answer. It is the only one you need right now." A young deputy standing near the report desk shifted uncomfortably. He had noticed the markings on the torn envelope before anyone else, and something about them continued to bother him. The seal had not looked ordinary. The paper itself felt heavier than standard legal forms, and several pages carried formatting that resembled federal documentation rather than county paperwork. Quietly, he bent down and looked more closely without touching anything. One corner displayed a bold chain of custody reference, followed by a warning that unauthorized opening could interfere with active legal process. His stomach tightened. "Ryan," he said carefully, "maybe we should wait for the lieutenant." Mercer waved him off without even turning around. "Relax. We are not running a museum." Naomi watched the exchange in complete silence. She did not smile. She did not argue. She simply stood with perfect posture, her hands resting lightly over the strap of her bag, while the second hand on the wall clock continued its steady sweep around the dial. Nearly 3 minutes had passed. Outside, a delivery truck rolled slowly along the street before disappearing around the corner. Inside, ordinary station sound seemed unusually loud. A printer started again. A telephone rang in another office. Someone closed a filing cabinet. Then everything settled back into silence. The dispatcher finally reached Lieutenant Harris and quietly explained that a visitor was requesting him in the lobby. The response on the other end changed her expression almost instantly. She looked from the telephone toward Naomi, then toward the torn documents scattered across the floor, before slowly placing the receiver back into its cradle. "Lieutenant Harris is on his way down," she said softly. Naomi nodded once. "Thank you." Mercer leaned against the counter with another confident grin, completely unaware that every passing second was moving the station closer to a moment none of them would be able to undo. Lieutenant Daniel Harris came through the hallway doors with the measured stride of someone who had spent more than 20 years separating facts from assumptions. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, his uniform pressed, and the reading glasses in his hand suggested he had been interrupted in the middle of reviewing reports. At first, his attention settled on Naomi Brooks. She stood exactly where she had been moments earlier, calm and composed despite the scattered documents surrounding her. Then his eyes moved to the torn government envelope lying across the reception floor. The color drained from his face so subtly that only the dispatcher seemed to notice. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. Before Naomi could answer, Ryan Mercer stepped forward with easy confidence. "Nothing serious, Lieutenant." She brought in some mysterious package, refused to explain it, and tried to tell us not to open it. "I checked it myself." End of story. Harris did not respond immediately. Instead, he slowly walked around the counter and crouched just enough to read the torn seal without touching it. His expression hardened. "Did anyone else handle these documents?" he asked. The young deputy near the report desk answered first. "No, sir. Nobody has touched them since they hit the floor." Harris nodded once, almost to himself. "Good." Mercer laughed softly. "Come on, Lieutenant. You are acting like it is radioactive." Harris stood and looked directly at him. "Ryan, did you personally break that seal?" "Yes, because nobody was willing to tell me what was inside." "Did she instruct you not to?" Mercer shrugged. "Several times." The silence that followed settled heavily across the station. Harris turned toward Naomi. "Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology for what happened before I arrived." She answered with the same steady tone she had used from the beginning. "I appreciate that, Lieutenant. May I ask one question?" "Of course." Were you given any alternative delivery instructions if the packet became compromised? Naomi met his eyes for a brief moment. Yes. Harris inhaled slowly. Then I assume those instructions are already in motion. Naomi nodded once. They began the moment the chain of custody was interrupted. Mercer frowned. Can somebody explain what everybody is dancing around? Harris looked at him with visible disappointment rather than anger. Ryan, sometimes the most important thing an officer can do is recognize the limits of his authority. Mercer crossed his arms. I still think this is being blown out of proportion. Before Harris could reply, a sharp electronic tone echoed from the dispatch console. The dispatcher glanced at the screen, blinked twice, and instinctively straightened in her chair. Another alert appeared almost immediately afterward. Then another. She looked toward Harris with unmistakable concern. Lieutenant, she said carefully, we just received a priority notification from the State Communications Center. They are asking us to keep all personnel inside the building until further notice. Mercer rolled his eyes. See? Probably just a training exercise. Nobody answered him. Through the wide front windows, the distant sound of approaching engines drifted across the quiet street. It was faint at first, almost blending with ordinary traffic, but it grew steadily louder with each passing second. Naomi checked the time one more time before slipping her notebook back into her bag. Without changing her expression, she spoke almost gently. They are right on schedule. The first black sport utility vehicle rolled silently into the parking lot, followed by another, then a third. None carried flashing emergency lights. None announced their arrival with sirens. Their quiet precision somehow made the moment feel even heavier. Every vehicle stopped at nearly the same instant, perfectly spaced as though every movement had been rehearsed long before this morning. Through the front windows, every deputy in the station watched without speaking. Ryan Mercer forced a small laugh that sounded far less convincing than before. That is a little dramatic, he muttered, trying to dismiss the growing tension. Lieutenant Daniel Harris never took his eyes off the parking lot. Nobody leaves this building, he said firmly. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who already understood what was unfolding. The dispatcher immediately locked the front entrance through the internal security controls. A soft electronic tone confirmed the command. Naomi Brooks remained exactly where she had stood since entering the station. She neither celebrated nor appeared anxious. She simply observed the scene with the patience of someone watching events arrive exactly on schedule. Outside, several men and women stepped from the vehicles wearing jackets marked with clear federal insignia. Their movements were measured, professional, and completely coordinated. One agent paused near the entrance to speak quietly into a shoulder microphone, while another reviewed a digital tablet before nodding once. They did not hurry because they did not need to. Every second appeared planned. Inside the lobby, the younger deputy who had first noticed the warning labels swallowed nervously. Lieutenant, he whispered, I have never seen this many federal people respond to one envelope. Harris answered without looking away from the glass doors. Neither have I. Ryan folded his arms again, refusing to surrender the confidence that had carried him through countless confrontations. Maybe they are here for somebody else. Naomi finally spoke. No. Her answer was quiet but unmistakable. They are here because the delivery protocol changed. Ryan frowned. You keep saying things like everybody is supposed to know what they mean. Naomi met his gaze without raising her voice. A sealed legal packet does more than carry documents. It preserves the integrity of a process. Once that integrity is compromised, the response becomes automatic. Ryan shook his head. Automatic. Yes. She paused briefly before continuing. No individual decides what happens next. The procedure decides. Those words lingered in the air far longer than anyone expected. Lieutenant Harris slowly removed his reading glasses and slipped them into his shirt pocket. He had spent decades teaching younger officers that procedure existed to protect everyone equally. Yet today, one impulsive decision had swept those protections away in a matter of seconds. The sound of polished shoes approached from outside as the first group reached the station entrance. One federal agent briefly displayed official identification through the glass before waiting calmly. Harris nodded toward the dispatcher. Open the door. The electronic lock clicked. The door swung inward. The lead agent entered with composed confidence, followed by several others. Instead of looking toward the deputies, He walked directly to Naomi Brooks. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks," he said respectfully. "We received confirmation that the chain of custody was interrupted. We are ready to proceed." Naomi offered a single polite nod. "Thank you." Everything occurred exactly as documented by the security cameras. For the first time since the envelope had been torn open, Ryan Mercer realized that not one person entering the station had asked who was in charge. They already knew exactly who they needed to speak with. The lead federal agent removed a thin credential wallet from his jacket and held it where Lieutenant Daniel Harris could examine it clearly. Harris nodded once and stepped aside without hesitation. The professionalism between them required very few words. The agent then turned toward Naomi Brooks. "Ms. Brooks, before we continue, can you confirm whether the packet remained in your possession until the seal was broken inside this facility?" "Yes," Naomi answered. "The packet remained secured from the moment I signed for it, until Deputy Ryan Mercer removed it from my hands." "And the security cameras captured the entire interaction?" "They did." The agent made a brief note before looking around the reception area. Every deputy stood silently, uncertain whether to move or remain exactly where they were. Ryan Mercer finally stepped forward, forcing confidence back into his voice. "Excuse me, but somebody needs to explain why my station suddenly looks like the headquarters of a federal task force." The agent regarded him calmly. "This is no longer a question of appearances, Deputy Mercer. We are here to preserve the integrity of an active legal process." Ryan frowned. "All of this because I opened an envelope?" "No," the agent replied evenly. "Because the envelope you opened was protected by a documented chain of custody connected to an active federal operation." The words settled heavily over the room. The younger deputy slowly lowered his eyes toward the scattered pages still resting untouched across the polished floor. He finally understood why Lieutenant Harris had insisted that nobody move them. They were no longer ordinary documents. They had become evidence of what had occurred inside the station itself. Lieutenant Harris folded his hands behind his back. "Agent, my personnel will fully cooperate." "Thank you, Lieutenant. We appreciate your assistance." Two additional federal officials entered carrying sealed evidence cases. Without unnecessary conversation, they photographed the torn envelope exactly where it rested, carefully documenting the condition of every page before anyone touched a single sheet. Their deliberate movements contrasted sharply with the impulsive decision that had created the situation only minutes earlier. Ryan watched in disbelief. "You cannot seriously be documenting this like a crime scene." The lead agent answered without emotion. "We are documenting a compromised legal process. Accuracy protects everyone involved." Naomi remained completely silent. She had no interest in embarrassing anyone. She simply observed as procedure unfolded exactly as she had expected from the beginning. Harris glanced toward Ryan with quiet disappointment. "This is why procedure matters." Ryan looked from one federal official to another, searching for someone who might reassure him that everything would soon return to normal. No one offered that reassurance. Instead, another agent approached the dispatcher and politely requested copies of the station surveillance recordings beginning 15 minutes before Naomi entered the building. The dispatcher immediately complied. Every request was specific, measured, and supported by written documentation. There was no raised voice, no confrontation, and no confusion. Only process. The calm precision made the atmosphere even more sobering. Ryan slowly looked back toward Naomi. For the first time since she had walked through the front door, he truly saw her. She had never threatened him. She had never argued with him. She had never claimed authority she did not need to announce. She had simply warned him, more than once, to leave the sealed packet alone. Standing only a few feet away, she met his eyes with quiet composure, not triumph. Then she spoke the same words she had tried to tell him from the very beginning. Respecting procedure is not about trusting the person standing in front of you. It is about respecting the law, even when you do not yet understand why it exists. Those words lingered in the silent station far longer than anyone expected, and for the first time that morning, Ryan Mercer had no immediate answer. For several long moments, nobody spoke. The reception area felt suspended outside of time as sunlight streamed through the tall front windows, casting bright rectangles across the polished floor where the recovered documents now rested inside carefully labeled evidence sleeves. The ordinary sounds of the station had faded into the background. The ringing telephones had stopped. The casual conversations had disappeared. Even the steady clicking of computer keyboards seemed quieter than before. The lead federal agent reviewed a checklist one final time before closing his folder with deliberate care. Every signature had been collected. Every photograph had been logged. Every page had been accounted for according to procedure. Nothing was rushed because nothing needed to be. Naomi Brooks stood near the entrance, watching the morning light reflect across the glass doors. She had spent years learning that the strongest response was often the calmest one. Anger rarely changed a situation, but patience allowed the truth enough time to reveal itself. Lieutenant Daniel Harris slowly approached her, his expression carrying the weight of quiet reflection rather than embarrassment. "Ms. Brooks," he said softly, "I have been wearing this badge for more than 2 decades, and today reminded me that experience never excuses assumptions." Naomi looked toward him with genuine respect. The willingness to recognize that is what keeps good officers good officers. Harris gave a small nod before glancing across the lobby toward Ryan Mercer, who remained standing near the reception counter. His shoulders were no longer squared with confidence. Instead, he stared silently at the empty space where the torn envelope had first landed, replaying each decision in his mind. The warning labels had been visible. The requests had been polite. The opportunity to stop had existed more than once. Yet certainty had spoken louder than caution. One of the younger deputies quietly walked over to Harris after the federal agents finished securing the evidence. "Lieutenant," he said almost in a whisper. "I almost laughed when she asked him not to open it." Harris answered without taking his eyes off the lobby. "Most mistakes begin before the action itself. They begin the moment somebody decides that listening is optional." The young deputy lowered his head thoughtfully. Those words settled into the room with surprising force. Outside, a gentle breeze moved the flag above the station entrance. Its slow motion reflected faintly across the front windows. People continued driving along the street beyond the parking lot, unaware that an ordinary morning inside a small county station had quietly become a lesson that everyone present would remember for years. Naomi reached into her messenger bag and removed another sealed folder, much smaller than the first. She handed it respectfully to the lead federal agent. "Replacement documentation," she said, "prepared in accordance with contingency protocol." The agent accepted it with a faint smile. "You planned for every possibility." Naomi answered simply, "No, I planned for human nature." The words lingered in the stillness without accusation. They sounded less like criticism than simple truth. Ryan finally lifted his eyes toward her. For the first time that morning, he noticed not her clothing, not her race, and not the quiet confidence that had frustrated him from the beginning. He noticed her professionalism. She had been prepared, respectful, and patient through every moment, even after being dismissed and underestimated. The realization settled over him more heavily than any lecture could have. In the silence that followed, the station no longer felt divided by authority or titles. It felt divided only by one simple difference between the people inside. Some had chosen to listen before acting, and one person had not. The lead federal agent received a brief message through his earpiece, listened without interrupting, then acknowledged it with a quiet nod before slipping a small tablet from his case. He walked toward Lieutenant Daniel Harris and turned the screen so both Harris and Naomi Brooks could review its contents. Ryan Mercer watched from several feet away, unable to hear the conversation, but noticing the immediate change in Harris's expression. The lieutenant inhaled slowly before looking back at Naomi with unmistakable respect. "I was not aware the operation had reached this stage," he admitted. Naomi answered calmly. "Very few people were. That was intentional." Harris nodded. "Now I understand why the chain of custody mattered so much." The lead agent closed the tablet and addressed everyone gathered in the lobby. "For the sake of clarity, I would like to explain why this response was necessary. The packet delivered this morning was not simply carrying legal paperwork. It represented the final authorization required before several coordinated federal actions could proceed simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions. Every seal, every signature, and every documented transfer existed to preserve the integrity of that process. When the packet was opened outside the authorized procedure, federal protocol required immediate verification that every document remained complete, secure, and uncompromised. The room fell completely silent. Even Ryan's remaining confidence seemed to disappear as the full meaning of those words settled over him. This had never been about a single envelope. It had never been about proving authority inside a county station. It had been about protecting a process much larger than any individual standing in the room. The younger deputy looked toward Naomi with quiet admiration. "You knew all of this before you walked in here." Naomi offered a small nod. "I knew the responsibility. I did not know how the morning would unfold." The deputy lowered his eyes, realizing she had tried repeatedly to prevent exactly what had happened. She had never challenged anyone's authority. She had simply asked for procedure to be respected. The lead agent continued. Ms. Brooks was selected to deliver the packet because of her record. During 12 years of federal service, every documented transfer under her responsibility has been completed without a single procedural violation. Her professionalism is precisely why she was trusted with today's assignment. Ryan looked at Naomi again, but this time he saw someone entirely different from the woman he believed had walked through the front door earlier that morning. He had mistaken quiet confidence for uncertainty. He had mistaken courtesy for weakness. He had mistaken patience for lack of authority. Every assumption he had made had been wrong. Lieutenant Harris finally broke the silence. "Ryan, there is something every officer learns sooner or later. The badge tells people what authority we carry. Our conduct tells them whether we deserve it." Ryan lowered his head without answering. There was nothing left to argue. Every fact had replaced every assumption. Every recording, every document, and every witness pointed to the same simple truth. Naomi had shown respect from the first moment she entered the building, even after being dismissed. She had protected the process instead of protecting her pride. She had allowed professionalism to speak where emotion would have accomplished nothing. As sunlight continued filling the quiet lobby, Ryan realized the greatest mistake he had made that morning was not opening a sealed packet. It was deciding who deserved respect before taking the time to understand who was standing in front of him. The final inventory was completed with quiet precision. One by one, the evidence cases were sealed, the documentation was reviewed, and every required signature was verified before the lead federal agent closed the last folder and placed it inside a secure case. Nothing about the process felt rushed. It reflected the same discipline that Naomi Brooks had tried to protect from the moment she walked through the station doors. The lobby remained unusually still. The confidence that had filled the room earlier that morning had been replaced by thoughtful silence. Deputy Ryan Mercer stood near the reception counter, watching the federal team prepare to leave. For the first time in years, he found himself replaying a conversation not to defend his actions, but to understand where he had stopped listening. Every warning Naomi had given him had been respectful. Every request had been reasonable. She had never challenged his position. She had only asked him to respect a process that existed long before either of them had arrived at the station. Lieutenant Daniel Harris stepped beside him without speaking for several seconds. Finally, he said quietly, "Every officer makes mistakes during a career. The difference is whether those mistakes become lessons or habits." Ryan nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting the station." Harris answered gently. "You were protecting your assumptions." Those words settled deeply. Ryan looked across the room toward Naomi, who was preparing to leave with the federal team after confirming that every required document had been replaced through the contingency procedure. She noticed him looking in her direction and waited calmly. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no resentment, no desire to embarrass him in front of his colleagues. Ryan walked across the lobby at a measured pace until they stood only a few feet apart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan removed his patrol cap, holding it respectfully at his side. "Ms. Brooks," he began, his voice quieter than anyone in the station had heard all morning. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I ignored your professionalism because I believed my position gave me the right to do so. I was wrong, and I am sincerely sorry." The room remained silent. Several deputies lowered their eyes, recognizing how difficult those words were for him to say. Naomi listened without interrupting. When Ryan finished, she gave a small nod. "Thank you for saying that." He hesitated before asking, "I do not expect forgiveness, but I hope one day I earn back the trust that I damaged." Naomi smiled gently, not because the morning had been easy, but because honesty deserved acknowledgement. "Trust is rebuilt the same way it is protected," she said. "One decision at a time." Ryan absorbed those words carefully. They were not a lecture. They were an opportunity. The lead federal agent approached with the replacement documentation secured inside a new evidence case. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "we are ready whenever you are." She nodded, then looked once more toward Lieutenant Harris. "Your station cooperated fully once the situation was understood. That matters." Harris extended his hand, and Naomi accepted it with quiet professionalism. "Thank you for treating everyone here with more grace than the circumstances required," he said. "Professionalism is easiest when everything goes well," Naomi replied. "Its true value appears when it does not." As she turned toward the exit, the morning sunlight filled the doorway once again. No one tried to stop her. No one questioned her authority. Every person in the station understood that genuine strength had never come from speaking the loudest or standing behind a badge. It had come from remaining calm enough to let integrity speak before pride ever had the chance. The last federal vehicle disappeared beyond the intersection, leaving the parking lot quiet once again. The morning sun rested high above the courthouse across the street, washing the brick walls of the sheriff's station in warm light that seemed almost unchanged from a few hours earlier. Yet everyone inside understood that the building itself felt different. The reception desk had been cleared. The polished floor no longer held scattered documents. The evidence cases were gone. Only the memory of what had happened remained, lingering more powerfully than any physical reminder could have. Lieutenant Daniel Harris stood for a long moment near the front entrance before turning toward the deputies gathered in the lobby. No one spoke. No one reached for a joke to break the silence. They simply waited. Harris looked around the room with steady eyes. "Every person who walks through these doors deserves the same respect before we know their story," he said quietly. "That is not only good policing. That is good character." No one disagreed. Ryan Mercer remained near the counter where the morning had begun. The confidence that once defined him had been replaced by something far more valuable. Reflection. He glanced toward the security camera mounted above the entrance, realizing it had captured far more than a procedural mistake. It had recorded the exact moment assumptions replaced judgment and pride replaced patience. Those images would remain long after the paperwork was complete. He slowly picked up a small piece of torn evidence seal that investigators had intentionally left behind because it held no evidentiary value. He studied it for only a second before placing it gently into the station's training file, where future deputies could see it alongside the incident report. He did not want the morning remembered because someone had been embarrassed. He wanted it remembered because one unnecessary decision had become an unforgettable lesson. Several weeks passed, and the station gradually returned to its ordinary rhythm. Citizens came through the front doors asking questions, reporting concerns, and requesting assistance just as they always had. One afternoon, a nervous elderly man approached the reception counter carrying a thick envelope marked with official government labels. Before the man could explain himself, Ryan stepped around the counter with a calm smile. "Good afternoon, sir," he said. "How would you like this delivered?" The elderly man looked relieved. "It needs to stay sealed until the lieutenant receives it." Ryan nodded immediately. "Then, that is exactly how it will remain." He personally escorted the envelope to Lieutenant Harris without opening it, examining it, or questioning the instructions. Harris accepted it with a quiet smile that required no explanation. Growth rarely announced itself with dramatic speeches. Sometimes it appeared in a single better decision. On another morning several months later, Naomi Brooks returned to the station for an unrelated matter. As she entered the lobby, Ryan recognized her immediately. He greeted her with the same courtesy he now offered every visitor who stepped through the door. "Welcome back, Ms. Brooks," he said warmly. "How may we help you today?" Naomi smiled, noticing that he asked the question before making any assumptions about who she was or why she had come. "Thank you, Deputy Mercer," she replied. "That is exactly the right place to begin." As she walked farther into the station, sunlight reflected across the polished floor beneath the American flag, standing quietly near the entrance. Nothing about the building appeared extraordinary to the people passing outside. Yet inside those walls, everyone who had witnessed that morning understood a truth they would carry for the rest of their careers. Authority could open doors. Titles could command attention. Badges could identify responsibility. But only humility, integrity, and respect could earn lasting trust. And those qualities belonged to anyone willing to choose them. Long before anyone else knew their name,